Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Friday Forum. My name is Cindy McDonald. I'm an educator, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a coach. And I'm so glad to be able to be your host for these Friday Forums. As you're coming into the Friday Forum today, please use the chat to let us know who you are and where you're at. And that way, our guest, Peter VanBuskirk, who we're so excited to have you back, Peter, is going to be able to see this, where you're all from, and you'll be able to see from each other as well. We also have Carmen Gallegos joining us. She is my right hand in my Friday Forums, and she's doing this from Stevens Institute in New Jersey. And she's going to watch the chat and the question and answers. As you know, this is a very interactive process. I love offering these Friday Forums and giving you a chance to listen to experts in subjects that matter to us. Things in education, things in business, things that are happening in the world around us that impacts you, impacts the students that you work with, or the work that we all do. So I'm so pleased that we all come from all parts of the world. And as you can see, Peter, we've got people from Ottawa. I know we have, I don't know if Monica's here from Switzerland. She's often here, Tacoma. It's, we have lots of different. I'm just so glad to see everybody coming in. So Peter, we're so glad to have you. You've been working with students and families for a really long time. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and where you're at right now?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And it's good to be with you today. I'm in Pennsylvania, for those of you who may not know. And at the moment, if it looks like I'm in a cabin, it's because I am in a cabin and it's cold out here. So Carmen, I get it. It's a little bit chilly in Pennsylvania. It's a temporary thing, but it is cold. I've been very fortunate. We were counting the years before we came live here. I've been very fortunate that over the last 45 years, I've been able to have pretty constant exposure into the college-going process. And I started in 1978, right out of college at a place called Juniata College in central Pennsylvania, a liberal arts college that at the time was really forced by enrollment pressures to engage in strategic enrollment management strategies and marketing things long before they were widely accepted in higher education. So my first 2 years in college admission really were the predicate for everything that I've done since. And I left Juniata after 2 years and went to work at Franklin and Marshall College for 25 years, where I became the dean of admission, executive officer in the office of the provost, which was fascinating. And for a couple of years, I was also the athletic director while I was dean of admission. So I've had an interesting range of experiences, but along the way, and I think this perhaps helps explain how I went from the institutional side to the sort of the private side. I had opportunities in many schools to present at junior college parent nights. Let's get everybody started on the right track for thinking about college. And I found that the way they were set up, the way the panels were conducted, the way I was expected to present, it never really gave me the opportunity to help people understand the process. In other words, whether it was me or others on the college side who would be participating, we kind of were inclined, if not trained, to give the audience what we wanted them to hear rather than what they needed to hear. And that was bothersome to me. As I watched the process, I saw not only that was there a gap between what we were telling them, what they need to know, but there was a real gap between the rhetoric, everything that was being spoken about the college admission process, and the reality. As I started to develop some programs of my own while I was still at Franklin and Marshall, those programs were well received by high schools, and the demand for them grew such that in 2004, I left the college to work independently. Initially, Peterson's Guides discovered my program and said, "Hey, do it for us." So I worked for Peterson's Guides for several years. But in 2007, I started Best College Fit, and I've been touring the country and out of the country to do programs for student and parent audiences about the college planning process. And I've learned that approaching folks sort of as a talking head about these things is not a really good idea, because quite frankly, our subject is a pretty dry subject when you think about it. So I've learned, I think, over time to, in some, if I might say, artful ways, try to create presentations that help to make the process real to the audience members, and inject some humor, some stories telling that helps to make it all relevant. So and this is kind of where I've been. And I've been very fortunate to present to audiences all over the country and in different parts of the world. What I've found is that as much as the process remains the same, it keeps changing too. And certainly through COVID, there were some sea changes that we experienced as colleges pivoted in the midst of COVID to remain open and provide instruction, et cetera. So there's some pretty dramatic things that came out of that. But at any rate, that's kind of where I am. I find myself to be a student of process. When I was an undergraduate, I was a sociology major, which I probably couldn't have told you what that really meant when I was in it. But the one sort of seminal moment for me in my own college education was when, in my junior year, I was taking a demographics class, which, think about what we do now, demographics would be perfect, with somebody who was really quite an expert in demographics worldwide. He had been afflicted by a stroke that left him paralyzed in part of his body, spoke with a thick German accent. So taking this class, it was something you did at your own peril, because the guy snarled. He didn't talk, he snarled. And we were in class, and everybody knew that, so that by the time this class registered, there were only 4 of us in the class. So, you can't hide in that class. And after the first session, the second day of the class, there were 2 of us left. And I mean, I loved what he had to say. I don't know that I necessarily loved the guy, but I loved what he had to say. And I'd sit in the class, and I was furiously taking notes one day, and he stopped in the middle of his lecture and he said, "Peter, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to get all this down. This is really good stuff." And he said, "That's not your job." And my eyes got really big. And he said, "It's your job to try to disprove everything I say." Wow, how do you respond to that? And he could see my bewilderment in me. He said, "Listen, if you can disprove something I've said, you've discovered a new truth. If you can't disprove it, you have validated an old truth. Regardless, you've come to a better understanding of the truth." And Cindy, that meant an awful lot to me then, and now 40 years later, it still is at the heart of what I try to convey to students and parents. Find the truth in your own experience, because it's that truth about who you are, what you want, how you want to accomplish it, that you can only find by looking inwardly. And that's why we're talking about fit today. We're talking about intentionality today. But it's that fit, or that reflection that can help establish the right path forward for every student. And I find myself telling that story about the demographics class quite often to students who are still a little bit bewildered about how they should be thinking about themselves and about their future.
So how does that change when you talk about that? I think that's so transformative to think about it from that perspective. How does that help students change that process for them?
Well, you think about it, and all of you, I know, work with young people entering your life at some point in their high school experience. Some of them come as early as 9th grade, some of them as late as 12th grade. And there's a certain angst that they all bring, because they feel like they're either behind, or there's an awful lot that they don't know that they need to learn, and they don't know where to start. So we've got these very impressionable young people, and many of them with parents or significant others in their lives who have some sense of what this should look like. And sometimes it's that predisposition of that other person that adds to the angst of the student, because there's a sense that the young people have that they got to get this right, and they need to do well in order to please and impress mom and dad. And what I find is when I start to talk with a student, if a family engages me, one of the things I want to do, first of all, is separate the student from the mom and the dad. And I want the first impression, the first extended impression that I have of the student to come from the student. You know, I'm sure all of you have had experiences where parents reach out to you and they'll say, can you work with us? Here's my daughter's resume. These are the things she's been doing. And you spend half an hour on the phone with the parent as the parent's kind of bragging up the kid. And you're thinking, what else do we need to do here? So again, what I try to do is kind of listen and look past that and give the student a chance to step up. 2 nights ago, I had a session scheduled with a young woman whose sister had just finished with me. And this is a young woman who's a sophomore, and she and her sister couldn't be more different in their orientations. And the younger of the two, the one I was meeting for the first time, really resented her sister because of the space that she occupied in the family's life and the way she kind of took over everything. And it turns out that the younger woman was bagging the session. She didn't show up right away for our Zoom. And it wasn't until her mom realized she wasn't on that she said, you better get on. And here's somebody who didn't know how to think about the process, felt like it was being thrown upon her. It's time that you do this. You need to get things done now so that you don't fall behind, et cetera, et cetera. And she had no idea how to start, where to start, what to think about, what would be important. And plus, this guy was the one who worked with my sister. So he's my sister's guy, not my guy. So why should I bother? Right. And I think we have to, in all the work we do, we have to prove our relevance to the kid. And we have to earn the student's trust, because if we don't have the trust of the young person, we don't have anything.
Yeah, you're not going to get very far at all. And so, yeah, it's not going to be beneficial. And I think that's key. And that sets the stage for helping students to, as you said, find their truth and think about things from a different perspective. So what are those different things that we talked about? The title of this is the 5 elements of best fit. So, you've developed these, you've identified these over years of working with students from both sides. So what was it that contributed to that? And what are those 5 elements that you have found?
Well, I don't know that this was present in my mind at the time, but I was concerned that there were students making bad choices, and students were being influenced by things, decision-making prompts that were not as appropriate as they should have been. Why do you want to go to a college? Well, my significant other's going there. My parents went there. They've got a great car sticker. There are a lot of sort of social, emotional reasons that have led students into situations that don't work out. But this became really sort of a mission of mine when I learned that barely half of the students who start college in this country, historically, barely half who start will ever finish. I think it's like 55% will ever in their lives get a degree. When you think about the number of young people who funnel into the college experience every year, over 2 million students, new students each year, and barely half of them will ever finish. Wow. I mean, what a waste of time, treasure, and talent. This is something that we should be concerned about. And it says to me that there are a lot of young people, even now on college campuses, who don't know why they're there, which has led me to, again, you'll have to forgive me, folks, if I'm saying things that you already think and do, but I think there's some real merit in this. It led me to opening conversations with students with this question: why do you want to go to college? Why do you want to go to college? And I suspect whenever you've done this, you kind of get that deer in the headlight look from the student, like, do I really need to know? Yeah. I talked with a young woman several weeks ago, and I said, so why do you want to go to college? And she looked at me sternly and she said, what is it? Some sort of a trick question? And I said, no, it's not a trick question. Why do you want to go?
You're my college counselor. Why are you asking me this?
Yes. And so she said, well, everybody goes to college. If I don't go to college, I'm going to be left behind. I reminded her that not everybody goes to college. And I said, if that is even true, is that a good reason for you to go? Oh, well, you don't know my parents. They're going to make me go. I don't have a choice in the matter. I mean, she was speaking from the heart about all this. And I suspect there are a lot of young people that you encounter who have the same feeling. I'm here because I have to be here. And so the point I make back to the student is, how's that working for you? In life, wouldn't you rather make choices because you see the options and you embrace them, or because you're told you have to do something? We'd much rather do things by choice than by mandate. And I remind students in the presence of their parents that they don't have to go to college. I mean, college is a choice to be made, right? They can graduate from high school, get a degree, work in the community, travel the world, hang out at home and play video games all day. Not that I'm an advocate for that, but what they need to understand is that they need to be conscious of choosing college, and if so, why? What's behind it? And I think that if we can start our conversation about college here, it's a good place, because so often we start the college conversation around a list. And if we're starting with a list, we're already misplacing our emphasis. So why do you want to go to college? And then the second question I ask is, okay, what's your bucket list? And as we get older in life, we think about the bucket list and what we want to do before we pass from this world or this life. Well, kids have bucket lists for colleges. What is it? And specifically, ask the kids, what are maybe 3 things you want to make sure you accomplish as a college student before you graduate? Not because of your college experience, but while you're there. And it's interesting, again, some kids rattle off 4, 5, 6 things right, and then other kids are kind of really trying to figure out what that means. It can be join a club, play in the band, travel abroad, have an internship, do research with a professor, lots of possibilities. But the point here is, why do you want to go to college? And okay, you have a sense of why you want to go. What is it you want to do? Now, some of you may have heard me tell some of these stories before, so I apologize if they get old, but I have 3 kids, and the youngest of my 3 is a young man who was really laid back in the college process. He was so laid back that even in his senior year, you had to check his pulse to see if there's anything college coursing through his veins. He wasn't talking with Dad because Dad was the dean of admission and he might know something. But so I would have to listen to conversations he'd have with others. And one time I heard somebody say, are you really going to go to college? Yep. Wonderful. Well, where do you think you want to go? Oh, I don't know. He said, I just want to go to a big school in the city. That's nice. Why would you do that? Well, that's where the action is. We want to be where the action was. Now, you can understand my consternation. I mean, we're not spending 4 years of tuition on the action. So I'm processing this and I'm thinking, okay, we got to talk. And finally, I said to him one day, what's on your mind? What's your bucket list? What are 3 things you want to make sure you accomplish? And this is the way the conversation can go. I mean, in this instance, he said, well, I want to go someplace where I can get a good education. Wow. I wasn't sure that was on his radar at all, but it gave me an opportunity to talk about that more. And this is what we can do with our kids. What will a good education look like to you? Mm-hmm. When you're in the midst of your 4 years, what's going on that makes it good? That makes it productive, that makes it fun? What's that dynamic? And we have to get them to think about that, because they just assume that an education's an education doesn't matter. It does matter. And I said, okay, so what would a good education look like? He said, well, I want to go someplace where I can learn lots of stuff. Okay, another good opportunity. I said, and he continued to say, I want to be able to ask questions. I want the professors to know my name. I want to feel like I'm part of what's going on at that school. So now he's starting to define the kind of learning environment that might make sense to him. I'm going to go someplace where I can study chemistry. It's a good idea. Do you want to learn chemistry in the lecture hall with 200 other students or in the lab? Oh, no, Dad. I want to go someplace where I can pour the chemicals in, stir things up, and see what happens next. And a lot of your kids do that too. They spend their days watching, listening, absorbing information, just waiting for that opportunity to see what works. And then finally he said, I want to go someplace where I can play my trumpet. Great idea, because he's a very talented trumpet player. He wasn't looking for a conservatory, but he wasn't ready to quit. He wanted a band, an orchestra, a place where he could play his trumpet. And it was a very short conversation, but consider what just happened. In that brief conversation, for the first time in his 17 years, this young man had heard an articulation of his priorities. And the revelation to him was that articulation was not coming from the old man. It wasn't Dad saying, you're going to do this. He was hearing from his own lips, and please hear this. He was hearing from his own lips the I want statements. I want, that began to give definition and direction to his thinking about his future. That sense of purpose that I think is really important started to begin to emerge from that conversation. I think this is what we can do with kids, and we can coach the parents to participate in this conversation too. So often parents try to get out ahead of the thought process. I think if we can encourage them to be coaches like we are, and ask questions that don't have to be answered in full all at one time, or at all in some instances, but at least start to seed the thought process. And so this is all a predicate, if you will, to the fit. Because I think once the students start to become purpose-driven, purpose-oriented in their process, and by purpose, I don't mean they need to know what they're going to do for the rest of their lives or what they're going to study in college, but they need to understand the importance of education in their future. Once they have that, the list will begin to emerge organically. It starts to happen. And I think that that's a healthy thing for these kids. So
yeah. Because what they're doing is then, because you didn't say, well, let's find what size or where the college located or any of those things. It's looking at what's important to them, as you said, the I statements and the experience that they're looking for. And then once you identify all of that, then you start looking for the opportunities that provide those experiences. You've narrowed it down. You're not just shooting arrows at a target and wondering which one's going to get.
Exactly. And that's when we can start to focus on the elements of the fit. So there are 5, and if it's okay, I'll kind of go through them here and slow me down if you need to, Cindy. But
yeah, and Carmen's gonna write them in the chat too.
Okay. The first element of a good college fit is pretty straightforward. The best college is a place that provides an academic program that meets the student's needs. Again, pretty straightforward. You want engineering, you find an engineering program. You want business, you find a business program. You want nursing, you find a nursing program. But what if you don't know what you want to do, which is most of the students out there?
Yeah, you're 17. How are you supposed to know? You're being pulled all these different directions. You have all these different interests. It's hard to know which one to narrow down.
Exactly. And a lot of these young people internally, if not otherwise, are kind of exploding with this notion of how can you guys expect me to look at college if I don't know what I want to do? Right. And the reality, as you know, is that most college students change their mind about their majors at least once. Half of them do it twice. So to be uncertain is to be normal. And our kids need to hear that every day. You're normal. Don't sweat it. And we need to remind them that that's what the college experience is about. It's about self-discovery. There are lots of other things that happen. Self-discovery is really at the heart of it all. The mistake a lot of kids make is this. They'll choose to apply to a university. The university application will say, tell us now, what is your major? We need to know now, what is your major? And the kid goes to mom and dad and says, what should I put here? I don't know what I want to do. My question is, why are you applying to that school? It's not a good fit. Any place that forces you to make a life decision before you're ready is not working for you, okay? Look instead at places that will allow, or better yet, encourage you to explore before you have to make those kinds of declarations. Liberal arts colleges, general studies programs. So right off the bat, find a place that has the program of study to meet your needs. And that may be a place that's a liberal arts college. It's a place that recognizes and honors the fact that you're still exploring. That's perfect, okay? And kids, by the way, kids will say, well, how do I approach that when I apply to college? They want to know what I want to study. They'll ask me, what am I going to study and why? To say, I've chosen your school. And you have to believe this, but I've chosen your school because I'm not sure what I want to do yet, but I like the way you've organized your curriculum to give me an opportunity to find out more about who I am and what I can do. That's a purpose-driven statement, right? Mm-hmm. The second element of a good college fit, and this is one I think that is really, really important. The best college is a place that provides a style of instruction consistent with the way the student likes to learn, likes to engage with the learning process. And again, kids don't make this distinction at all. They just assume it all happens the same way everywhere, and it doesn't. So there's some exercises, really simple exercises. I suggest that if you don't do them already, you try them with students early in the process. You can say things like, if you want to learn biology, would you rather learn biology from the book or from the lab? Same material, but it's a different experience, right? Book or the lab. If you want to learn history, would you rather learn history in a lecture hall of 200 students listening to the professor talk about the books you just read? Or would you rather be in a seminar room with maybe 15 to 18 students participating in a conversation led by the professor about the books you just read? Same content, same books, different approach. And when you frame it that way, kids begin to see the difference. And then they begin to think, oh, I do like this, I do like that. And they can make some critical distinctions. Another exercise that I find can be a lot of fun, especially if a group of students, begin the conversation by saying, if a teacher were to come in the room at the end of the academic year and say, I've lost my grade book, So everything you've done all year is gone, but I still have to give you a grade. You get to choose your form of assessment. So to get a grade for the whole year in our class, you can take a test, you can write a paper, 20-page paper, or you can do an independent research project, get a grade for the whole year. What would you choose? Whenever I ask students in the group, I'll say, how many of you would rather do the test? A few put their hands up. Why would you prefer the test? Well, invariably they'll say, well, I'm good at tests. I like to know the content that I'm responsible for. I know that once I prepare, get it done, take the test, it's over. Okay. How many of you prefer to write the paper? A few more hands go up. Why would you prefer that? Well, I like to write and I like to research ideas. I like to express myself creatively and effectively in prose, and that's just my thing. Okay. How many of you prefer to do the project? Lots of hands go up then. And at the outset, there'll be students who say, well, I want to do a project because I'm not good at tests and I don't like to write, so I'm going to do the project. Okay, the default answer. And then you get some very thoughtful responses that say, I like the creative aspects of a project, the opportunity to explore new ideas, new areas, find information, and then be able to present it in different media, et cetera. So standing back from that with that group of students, I'll say, what's the common denominator here? What's everybody saying? I'm choosing this because it works for me. And notice that each option will weigh differently with each one of you. And this is something to keep in mind. And then if you're dealing one-to-one with a student and you have this conversation and the student is saying, no, I want to do the project or even the paper, but doing the project, for example, and then proceeds to give you a list of colleges that enroll 15, 25, 35,000 students. What I say is, I don't know how to make sense of this, because if you go to one of these places, you're not going to do projects. You're going to do a lot of fill in the bubble tests. Oh. And it's not a matter of good, like big, small, good, bad. It's a matter of recognizing where your strengths can really be developed more effectively. So I think this is something we need to help kids with. I think I don't have research on this, but my intuition says that a lot of those students who start and don't finish really don't finish because they don't know how to finish. They don't know how to move forward in an environment that suddenly becomes foreign to them in terms of the way it's structured for instruction. I'll pause if there's anything you want to interject here, because I have 3 more to go.
Well, and I think that is very indicative too of helping to refocus the whole conversation, instead of, well, I'm looking for a college that has XYZ, to I'm looking for a college or an opportunity that will meet my needs. Stephen Antonoff, who many people know and is a good friend of mine, has the college match. And I always loved that part of it that has the participant learner, because you're either an observant learner or a participant learner, as you've just described very, very well, eloquently. And different students learn better in different environments. And knowing that about yourself not only helps you in this process of going to college, but it'll help you as a learner now. It'll help you in your career. I mean, just understanding about those things about yourselves, having those questions that you're posing for the students, the more they understand themselves and how they operate, the better they can be in lots of different areas.
Well, absolutely. And I was, my example of the student who might be interested in the project and looking at the big school is going to be out of place there. Conversely, the student who's the observant learner who goes to a small school is going to feel like she's in a fishbowl all the time. Everybody's watching me, look at me. I mean, they really prefer to have more privacy, a little more distance. So it's not a matter of right or wrong types of schools. It's a matter of what makes sense to the student. And that's when I talk about fit, I'm not talking about necessarily an overall sense of what's best for one person is best for everybody. It's not that proposition at all, but what makes sense for you.
For you. Right.
And where the reflection takes place.
Yeah.
The best college for a student is going to be a place that provides a level of rigor or challenge that is commensurate with the student's ability and preparation. And I add preparation in there because a lot of able students who aren't always prepared. Again, this is logical, right? Kids who go through high school are promoted at the end of each year, reflective of their competencies. They move from the 9th grade to 10th grade to 11th grade, 12th grade. They get to 12th grade. Do they choose a college that challenges them at the same level they finished high school? I hope not, because that's like repeating high school all over again. They should go to the next logical step up. Now, there are going to be some kids, and you probably work with a lot of them, who get to high school finish here and they want to go there. And you know the odds of that. And then you have to express those odds to the kids. But if they happen to get into that place and they're ready here, and they get in there, they spend 4 years trying to prove they belong, rather than easing into that environment and getting the most out of their ability. Some kids can do this at the end of high school, and they choose colleges that challenge them here.
Mhm.
And I suspect the life of the mind is not most important to them if that's the case, but they'll go and have a good time. After a couple of semesters, they'll come home and say to their moms and dads, hey, you know what, I'm having a good time, but I'm not being challenged. I think I need to transfer. Well, of course, your brain's here. And your brain is saying, you put me here rather than where I can be. I got to get out. I got to grow myself here a little bit. So I think this is a straightforward one. We need to help encourage kids to move to challenges that are logical step ups for them. And kids will look at you and say, well, how will I know what that is?
Right.
You can help them, but I would also suggest have them talk to their teachers. I mean, who better than the people who see them every day in the classroom to give them a sense of what's possible, what their competencies are, what their capacity is to move forward. And so I encourage kids to invite their teachers into that conversation and help them understand what that growth potential might be.
So this is number 3 element.
That is number 3, right? Yeah. Yep. So we've got the number 1 was the best fit is a place that provides the instruction to meet needs. The second is a style of instruction. Third is a level of rigor or challenge that is commensurate with students' ability and preparation. And number 4, I think, kind of fits into what I think a lot of people popularize about the process, and that is the best college is a place that provides a sense of community that feels like home. Okay. And the way I express it is this: as kids get older, there's this growing need to be out from under somebody else's thumb. They want independence. They want to make decisions for themselves. They don't like it that we're in their business all the time, telling them what to do. They got to get out of here. And they oftentimes don't hesitate to tell us how eager they are to get out of here. Right. And so what happens, and I'm sure that you've seen this with kids all throughout your careers, there's going to be a little voice that comes into their head as they get closer and closer and closer to high school graduation. And that little voice in their head says, well, they do feed me. They give me a place to stay. I get to drive a car. My friends live right down the street. I do have a pretty good life right where I am. Do I really have to go? Mm-hmm. Yes, you can't live in your parents' home forever. Okay. And if college is a part of that new life that you want for yourself, why not choose a place that feels like home? It will not be home. It will not include all of your best friends from high school, maybe none of them at all. But if you choose well, it will include people who become your best friends for life. That's a school that sees who you are, respects who you are, doesn't expect you, mixing metaphors here, doesn't expect you to change colors, if you will, to fit in. They want you to be the best you can be. And think about it, when kids can go to college and not have to worry about dressing right, speaking right, doing all the social things the right way, when they can be themselves, they'll relax and they'll be doing the best work they can academically. And then finally, the best college fit is going to be a place, and I think this is really, really important. This is something that thematically ties through a lot of programs I do. The best college is a place that values you for what you have to offer. Mm-hmm. It's the place that has seen what you've been doing in school and in life. It knows your trajectory into the future. It simply wants to be part of that trajectory for 4 years. Because they want you, they will accept you. They will give you the financial assistance that you might need or want, and they will demonstrate to you very clearly how they will invest in your success. I think that's a really happy ending opportunity for students. Find places that want you, and they're going to take care of you. And if cost and affordability are important, that's where you find the answer. Places that want you. And we talked about this before, right? In our financial aid session, they'll make sure that you're not only admitted, but you're given the resources you need. And I think that this is an important consideration for families that seem to think that they have it figured out. And they're saying, well, how do we get into XYZ schools? Well, what's the likelihood that XYZ school is going to value this student? If that school is admitting 5% of its applicants, what kind of value, what's your value proposition for that school? How do you think that they're going to see you apart from all the rest? And that's when sometimes families will step back and say, oh, okay, well, where do you think we might be valued? Good question. And then I think as advisors and advocates for the kids, what we need to be saying to them is, what is it that you want colleges to know about you that sets you apart? What is your value proposition? And a lot of kids don't know how to talk about that beyond the resume. They'll say, well, I've been, 3-sport captain. I've been in the music. Okay, that's all good. Colleges can see that, but what is there about you that colleges can't see?
Mhm.
And this is where I think we have a real opportunity to help students shape their understanding of self and then shape the presentation that they make to colleges. That's been one of the most gratifying aspects of my work over the years with kids is helping them through that process of self-discovery. And it's my belief, and I'm sure you have seen this as well, Cindy, that the college planning, search, and application process, if done well, if done thoughtfully, if done with a sense of purpose, has a value that's equal to anything that can happen in college.
Right. Yeah, the value is in the journey more and many times
Yes.
than the outcome where you end up, because you've grown and learned as a person. And it's such a pivotal time in adolescence, development too. They're, sometimes they're not quite ready to make that discovery. But with some guidance from us as advisors, they can go through that process. And some are more than ready to do that. So, yeah, and it all takes the whole onus off of, well, where should you go, or what's the name, or what's the sport, or, where is it located? All of that then becomes very tertiary to what you're doing with the student.
There are a couple things I would add here. One is there's an awful lot of noise out there. Wherever there's a soccer game, their moms and dads standing by the fence talking to each other about what they know about the college planning process. Well, we've been there. We know what they do. I was doing just a rough survey of some of the consulting groups that are online now, and one group billed itself as I'm not going to mention name, billed itself as the best in the world because we got into those schools. We know what it takes. Baloney. If you got into those uber selective schools, you have no clue about what got you in. You won the lottery. Okay. And unfortunately, young people at the front end of the process don't understand that. They believe there is some secret sauce somewhere and they're trying to find it. But that secret sauce is within them. It's going to be recognizing who they are and making that fit thing work as well as possible.
But how do we help? Because I think it's even more, we find that with parents. They're the ones that are really looking for that secret sauce. And oftentimes that's that connection. Oh, you went to the school, therefore you know how to get my child in there. How do we convince parents or share with parents that this is a different process? Have you found any secrets to that, Peter?
Not consistently. I think part of the reason there is that I'm pretty firm with parents up front about the fact that I'm dealing with their kid rather than them. But I think that it's important to be firm with parents in our assessment of what's going on. I think so often we become concerned that if we are too firm, and I don't mean obnoxious, but I'm just saying we understand what's going on better than they do. And when we assert that, we're afraid that we'll send them away and we'll lose a client and they'll never come back and they'll say bad things about us and that kind of thing. I think what is probably more impressive to parents is the realization that they can trust you. I mean, if you seem to have an insight, a perspective born out of experience that can be trusted, they may not like initially what you have to say, they may not agree with it, but they'll listen again. And I think when we can provide specific examples, we can provide logic that helps to dispel some of the notions that they carry with them. That helps an awful lot. For example, I talked with a dad. I am currently not been engaged by this family. I don't know if I will be or not, because I was pretty firm with him. But he was asserting to me that I know, because I recruit, that's my business. I'm a recruiter, an executive recruiter. I know that where you go to college makes a difference. And what I didn't ask him is that, what field do you recruit in? If you're recruiting for top law firms, you're right. But if you're recruiting in other aspects of you know, work life, is going to be very different. And I think that what you're going to discover, help parents discover, is it's not where you go to school that's most important, it's what you get out of that experience. And even in the world of business and in government politics, there's many people who are populating those worlds who didn't go to big name schools, as there are people who went to big name schools. You know, good heavens, we had a president who went to Eureka College. We had a president who went to Whittier College. Many people don't know that those places exist, right?
Right.
You know, it's not that they were bad presidents or bad colleges. It just, you can get to the end of your rainbow, if you will, by whatever college or university route that makes sense to you. And then, you know, life takes over. So I think that we have to get parents to back down. We have to get parents to remember that what's most important here is serving the student rather than the parent's desire to be measured as an effective parent. And there's some presentations that I do where I will remind parents that you know, your children are carrying a great weight of expectation on their shoulders. They feel the expectations that you have for them to be successful, because it's going to be a measure of their success as parents. And so parents, back off. This isn't about you. Your kids are going to be fine. You need to support them, love and support them in all aspects of the process, regardless of the outcome.
Well, and parents love their children. They don't want to cause harm to their children. They may put a lot of pressure, but in the end, they love their children and want best for them. So if we can, you know, bring that to them and not only bring it to their attention, but get their buy-in on it, you know, that's our role as advisors. And sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not, but that's a part of starting that whole process. And I think part of it too, and this is what I found, is when I engage the parents and the students and we have different activities, so that the parents can hear what the student's thinking and the student can hear what the parent's thinking. Sometimes that's very valuable, and it's in a neutral environment, you know, because it's something that I'm facilitating. That can be very powerful. And then that helps those parents to make that next step. And it's like, okay, you know, my child's in good hands. I know what I'm doing. I see the value of it, and they're a part of that whole process. And so that's why everybody hears me talk. I mean, self-exploration is the very first part of this whole process, and it's the crucial part because everything comes after that. So
it is the directional aspect, that's for sure.
So I want to ask you a little bit, and this is where I struggle as a counselor and advisor. And there's two things that I see. You talk about having students, you know, be at the rigor or above where they're at. How do I determine what that college really offers? Where the level they truly are? Because all colleges are going to make themselves look great on their publications. And even if I go visit the college, unless I have students who've actually gone there and I can really quiz them in terms of what they've done, I may not necessarily know exactly how rigorous the experience is going to be for my students.
That's a good question, Cindy. And this is where I think my perspective may differ from that of many others. Whereas many who do independent consulting make it a point to put feet on the ground on college campuses, as many as possible. I've probably seen half a dozen colleges, and those are the colleges my kids visited. I feel that part of the process is the responsibility of the student and the family. And the student may not understand that. And I don't mean to present it as a burden to the student. I present it as an opportunity. So when I talk with families, I'll say, especially when they're early in the process, I'll say, here is your opportunity to go window shopping. You know, you're not going to buy, you're not going to find the perfect school, you're going to see what's there.
Yeah.
And when families truly window shop, as you do with anything that you might consider a consumable in life, you're going to check out, you know, big, small, efficient, not efficient, whatever. But with regard to colleges, kids need to see a broad range of types of places so they can begin to identify with things that they like consistently on different types of schools. But I encourage kids also to sort of do a deeper dive into understanding the campus and the culture, the academic culture of a school. And during COVID, I think we learned something very powerful about what that access can be, because families couldn't get to campuses so easily, but the websites were still active. And how often do you talk with a student who is professing an excitement about a particular institution, and you say, so what do you know about it? I'll tell you a story about a young man I talked to or worked with a few years ago. His name is Jerry. Jerry was steadfast in his excitement about wanting to go to Cornell. Well, why would you want to go to Cornell? He was pretty open about it. He wanted the car sticker. He wanted everybody to know he got into Cornell. And so he's very superficial in his approach. So the way I tried to get him to understand better that fit part for him was to let's go on the website together and see what they have to offer. And because I'd asked him, oh, you're interested in public policy? Yep. What do you know about public policy? They have it. Well, he'd seen the homepage, checked that box and moved on. So we went to public policy, and as we're reading through what the professors did, what their expertise would be, what they taught, when they taught, which is important for kids to understand when we're talking about that academic fit. A pop-up ad occurs on the screen promoting webinar for internships in public policy at Cornell 2 days later. And I said, what do you think about that? And he said, that's pretty cool. And I said, what do you think about that? So why don't you see if you can join that webinar? To his credit, he did. They invited him in, and 2 days later, there he is with Cornell students learning about public policy internships at Cornell. And he started asking questions, which meant that there were some sidebar conversations that developed with him or for him with other students who began to talk to him about their experiences and the professors that they thought were really pretty good and relevant. And his understanding of what was available to him at Cornell started to become much clearer. Now, it's not really speaking to the level of challenge or rigor, but it spoke to the kind of culture that was available. The part about the level of challenge and rigor, I think, is probably best answered by the academics in the student's life. I mean, we may intuit what we think is going to be right for a kid, but I think that the teachers are probably going to be best positioned to help them find that right direction. But I think that there's a lot of fact finding and impression developing that can happen before a kid leaves his bedroom. If you have a computer, you can learn a lot about the college process and learn about the colleges that are out there.
Well, and I think that connects to the other aspect of what you described is finding the colleges that value what you have to offer, because those students that are often at that higher level, then they're offered those scholarships at the colleges to help improve or increase the profile of the college. And some students go and do really well with that, but as you discussed, some don't. And so there is that component of the scholarships. You may be offered the scholarship, but that becomes the question to ask, is this enough to accommodate you at the academic rigor level that you need? It may or may not be.
Well, that's right. And there's a whole other discussion about scholarships and what that can mean for the student subsequently. But I think that when you think about the selectivity of institutions, the schools, the student might apply to different schools. Some might be very happy to admit the student and provide the scholarship. Some might be happy to admit the student, no scholarship. Some might put them on a wait list. Some might not admit them at all. And you can kind of predict that admissibility by looking at the selectivity of the institution and or the selectivity of the specific program the kid wants, and compare the kid's own profile with the profile of the institution. If the kid's right smack in the middle of the academic profile at a school that admits 1 out of 5, chances of that kid getting in are 1 out of 5. I mean, it's a pretty, I think, direct approach. Now, there may be some other factors, non-academic factors, that elevate the kid's likelihood of getting in, but that's a pretty safe assessment, I think. Again, it's not a question of whether the kid is academically moving into the right level of challenge. but it's addressing the question of what's the student's likelihood of admission.
Yeah. And they, in some ways they're separate, and in some ways they're connected,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. The thing that's kind of hard is that most students applying to most colleges, and I'm going to go with a big number, like 90% of the students applying to colleges and universities around the country are self-selecting themselves into applicant groups where, given the chance, they can do the work. Some of them will be superstars and some of them will just be getting by, but they can do the work. And the objective here is to, as a student, find a place where you're going to be doing the work comfortably. And you try whatever measures you have at your disposal to figure out where you're going to be able to do the work comfortably. If you're going to be constantly stretched, challenged to find your way through, that's not a very satisfying experience, I think.
Right. Well, and that's important to communicate with parents too. Yeah, you may get into Harvard or Cornell, whatever, with your legacy or sports or any of those things, but at what cost and what price and what experience? And if you laid that foundation, as you've said in the beginning, and that self-exploration of why you're going to college, what do you want to learn, what do you want to experience there, then you can reflect those back to the student and the parents, like, are you going to meet these? And that's one of the things, like, you know, I know most of us and a lot of us do a priorities activity with our families. You know, what are you really looking for? You can't have everything. You know, you're never going to find a college that's absolutely perfect. So what are your priorities? And then as you go through that self-exploration, here's the kind of college, like I'll write a paragraph that says, here's the kind of college that's going to meet your needs. And then when we get to that final list, like, well, which ones reflect back to this, you know, and sometimes, you know, in that process, we lose sight of that. And so going back to a vision, you're helping your students create a vision. And I think that can be very powerful.
My goodness, Cindy, it sounds like you're talking about a holistic approach to college counseling.
Imagine that. Well, I'm wondering if we have an awful lot of, I'm seeing a lot of people who I know who have lots of knowledge and expertise and lots of different ways to approach this. And I also know people who are former admissions professionals. So if anybody has a question, we've got a few minutes. I want to give opportunity for any questions. You can either put them in the chat or in the Q&A. I don't see any questions that have been, everybody's just been listening to us. So,
well, sometimes you preach to the choir. I mean, that
is true.
Your audience is going to be an audience that's well-versed in the process and is well-practiced in the process. So I suspect there's not an awful lot we've talked about that's new, but hopefully some things we've discussed have confirmed what we've wanted to believe were truths in our work.
Well, and I think we all need this to have, because we're telling our students this, but hearing from somebody else like yourself, where you can say, okay, I'm going to, you know, I'm not the only one telling this, even as a parent, you know, I'm not the only one telling you this. There are other people here that are supporting what I'm telling you. And that can make a very important thing. So go ahead, Carmen.
There is a question in the chat. Cindy, you had said there was 2 items you wanted to discuss. You mentioned figuring out rigor. What was the second one?
Oh, the second one, that's an excellent question. The second one was the scholarships, you know, because sometimes students, if they're at that rigor level, then they're going to be admitted and receive scholarships at possibly a lower level. So, so that was the second thing.
Well, and I think the family has to figure out at the outset what's most important, because there's a lot of pleasure to be taken from being recognized with a scholarship, and moms and dads love to talk to their peers about the scholarships their kids get. So, you know, are you applying to, on the admission side, we refer to that as collecting scalps, which is probably not a good PC reference any longer. But, you know, are you applying simply to see where you can get in and how many times you can get in, or are you, you know, really being intentional about your search to find places that make sense? And, you know, at the end of the day, you should be looking for those places that give you that great satisfaction that you know you can do a good job, and that's the place where you want to be. Right. And if they happen to reward you with need-based, or hopefully if you need assistance, with the right kind of need-based assistance, but also merit-based assistance, that's pretty cool.
Peter, do you ever Do your parents ever push back or question that you don't visit schools?
No. The only time that I've had that question was a very special situation where the young person in question has severe health issues. And the parent was saying, well, how are you going to help us find the right place for our child, given the health issues at work here? And I said, I don't have that feet on the ground experience on college campuses. I cannot tell you what one school does better than another in that regard. That's your job. And even if I had some sense from my own experiences, the information you'd be getting would be through my filter rather than something that you could trust from your own experience. And what I've tried to do is move resources to that family so they could be more informed about their own search. But that's the only time that really is I've had a challenge with regard to that. But when I start to engage a family, I make it pretty clear that I'm not there to manage the process for them. I'm there to coach. I'm there to be an advocate, to support, make myself available whenever and if ever they need help. But what I want to do is give them the tools to be able to start the process on their own.
With no test and unreliable GPAs, how do you decide on rigor? Would the consultant talk to the teacher? Consultant. Would the consultant talk to the teacher?
The consultant's not really talking to the teacher. The student and the parents need to talk to the teacher and say, and heaven knows there are a lot of parent-teacher conference opportunities throughout the year. And I think the students can be saying to the teacher, what do you think makes sense for me? And frankly, when students are asking teachers for letters of recommendation, they're asking the teachers they respect, they admire, teachers they feel close to. They should, in those relationships, ask questions that can give them some better direction here. And sometimes teachers will volunteer that to the student, but I don't know that it's our job as a consultant to talk to the teacher. It's the job of the family to be listening to the kind of direction they're being given. Quite often they're being given good direction. They don't take it all the time.
And they're asking questions about, well, what level of math am I in? Where would you recommend that I go? And what would be my next step, in terms of whatever, math,
right,
or English, whatever subject it is.
There might seem to be an interest in engineering, so I want to be an engineer. And then the teacher says, well, you've had pre-calculus through your junior year, you might get calculus next year. And a lot of these engineering programs are going to require Calc AB or BC AP. So you may find that your preparation is not quite as strong for some engineering programs, but others might give you an easier pathway into engineering so that you can build up your capacity, or maybe even do a summer program at a community college where you can take that AP calculus and be ready for it. So I think the teachers can be helpful that way.
Yeah, well, and then what we do is help supplement that, because a lot of times the teachers will say, well, you need this or that, but they don't know how to give it. Or when I was a school counselor, I couldn't recommend an out-of-the-box solution. I had to recommend the pathway that was available to the schools and students in my district. But as an advisor now, I can say, well, go take that UC class online, or that BYU extension class. Here's ways you can go outside of the box and accomplish this that's outside of what your school offers.
Absolutely. And Carmen just said something that kind of struck me interesting. And so I'm going to make this comment not specifically related to what you said, Carmen, but I think that a lot of parents, when they hire consultants, see the consultant as an extension of the parent. In other words, they see the parent or the consultant as somebody who will do what the parent would or can't do. You can talk to my kid better than I can, but make sure you're doing these things. And that's why a lot of consultants probably do approach this in a very measured, programmatic way with the students, because that's what the parents expect. Mm-hmm. Parents want to know, what are you going to do to make sure my child is on track to da, 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 da. And I think that's why, again, maybe I'm a little different in this regard, but I say to the parents, I'm not going to be you. I'm not going to do all those things that you would do if you were left unchecked. But what I'm going to try to do is empower your child to think critically about this process and to think critically about herself. And that whether it has to do with course selections, college destinations, whatever it might be.
That's a very good point. And we find that that persona is put on us, and helping to combat that is a challenge. So I
Mhm.
see Jean just put in a really good question. So let's finish with that. And then I'll share what our next Friday forum is going to be.
When you have a student convinced they belong in an IB that from a data standpoint has no chance, how do you provide realism and how much without undermining their overall confidence?
What I'll do with any student at a fairly early part time in our time together, I will ask the student, and oftentimes with the parents present, would you like me to handicap your chances of getting into these schools? So it's not just a particular school, but it's oftentimes a list. And it's an early list. And I encourage kids to have long lists to start, as long as they get to the end of the summer before the senior year, they try to narrow it down to 8, because I think 8's, if they care about doing a good job, 8's a good number. So we go through the list, and again, based on what I know of the selectivity of the institution or the program in question, and what I know of the student's credentials relative to the profile of the school, I can go down the list. Okay, 25% chance of getting in. And I don't talk about safety, reach, target. I talk about probability. 25% chance of getting in, 40% chance, 8%, 5%, 3%, 12%, 12%, 3%. And you go down the list, and you're making these assertions, and invariably a parent will interrupt and say, it sounds like we have a lot of low probabilities here. Do you think we should be looking at some schools that there's a better chance of getting in? Not a bad idea. Okay. And from the conversations you have with families about list building, a good list is one that has a good balance. There will be some low probabilities. There need to be some high probabilities. There need to be some a good number of schools that are probably where the probability is 40 to 60%. But what I try to discourage families from doing is overloading on the low probabilities. Okay, you have an absolute dream desire to go to this particular school, do it. Okay, proceed with that, because you need to satisfy yourself that you've done it, you've given it your best shot. But let's not line up 9 other schools that look just like that one and plan to apply to them just in case. Think about probability, and save yourself a lot of anguish down the road.
But the parents are going to come back and say, but my child is different. The probability is going to be much higher for them.
How is your child different? And what I'll do is I'll remind families, you know how many high schools there are in the country? Over 26,000. Okay. Do you know how many valedictorians there are in this country? Over 26,000. Okay. And your student is in the 3rd decile of her class in high school. Okay. That's not even a valedictorian. Do you know how many students applying from the countries of India and China combined come from the top 10% of their class in their high school? More from those countries, from the top 10% of their high school classes, than coming from all the high schools in this country going to college. So there's so much excellence out there. And that's why we go back to fit. What you have to do is look at the probabilities and then try to anticipate how what you have to offer will be valued by the institution. And you might have something great. I had a kid who I was certain was going to get into Yale because of what he had. I thought was great, and they should want this kid with this 1550 SAT, with this 4.4 GPA and an IB curriculum. It seemed to be perfect. They didn't take him. It wasn't because he was bad. It's because they valued something somewhere else, right? And he ended up with very fine options otherwise. And my advice to him, and my advice to your kids, and I'm sure you give the same advice, is I said to him, listen, you're set for life. You're set for life, not because of where you go to school, but because of who you are, what you've done, and what you can do. The college that gets you will be lucky. Yeah.
And then you bring it right back around to them. And this is another term that Steve uses that I use all the time, and that's school enthusiasm. You're going to make what happens at college for yourself. You have the enthusiasm, you have the drive, you want to be there. And it's an internal drive that you've demonstrated. It doesn't matter which college you go to, you're going to make it happen for yourself. And so, just helping them bring that back. Well, thank you so much, Peter. This has just been so delightful. So glad to have you even in, with you in your cabin in Pennsylvania. And Carmen, thank you for helping today. And in a month, we'll be back. I don't have any other Friday forums for February, just due to travel and other schedules, but I have We have 5 Fridays in March. So we'll be back here on March 3rd with Harlan Cohen, and he's going to be talking about helping students to turn failures into successes. Ethan Sawyer is going to join us on the 17th. Brad Schiller from Prompt is going to talk about AI and Chat GPT and what that'll look like, and college essays. And then Hannah Stotland's going to join us the end of March and talking about how we value ourselves and from a business perspective. And then I've got things lined up for April too. So lots of things on hand for the future. Also have some paid workshops that we'll be doing, and I'm going to start some groups too. So be watching your emails for information on that. So Peter, thank you. Enjoy your weekend. I hope you guys have some fun and
We
stay
absolutely will.
warm. And
Stay warm is a big deal, but yes, we're going to have fun. Thank you. Thanks, and good luck to everybody with your work.
thank you. And thank you, Carmen. Have a good weekend.
Bye. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
And
Bye-bye.
thank you everyone for being here today. And I hope you'll see you in a month.